Experts explain how humanity is most likely to be wiped out. From nukes to supervolcanoes, the world is full of risks and threats, they say. From super eruptions to all-out nuclear war, three experts weighed in and giving their takes on what the end of humanity might look like and whether we have a chance of surviving any of these events. When all is stripped back, it's a wonder that humans are still alive, they say. The planet is filled with danger, threats seemingly around every corner, much of it completely unavoidable or unpredictable. Well, sort of. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans have largely lived peacefully alongside the things that pose the greatest dangers: wild beasts, freak weather, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts. More recently, new existential risks have come into focus, things like the effects of climate change and lingering anxiety of all-out nuclear warfare. But what exactly poses the greatest threat? And is humanity really at risk from a single thing? The reporter spoke to three experts about some of the most pressing dangers to humanity of our time. Some are avoidable, others entirely out of our control. The first, nuclear war. In the grand scheme of things, nuclear warfare is the baby of existential threat, having only been around since the mid-20th century, but it does not mean that it's one to stress less about. Far from this. The threat of nuclear oblivion is one of, if not the most talked about threats to existence, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine only reigniting what many believe was a menace no more. And today it's a plausible route to the end of humanity. This is what Julian Lindley French, chairman of the Alpen Group TAG, who has worked with NATO and penned numerous books on defense strategy, and he notes that once countries start using them, an increasingly likely scenario in today's world, you cross a very, very big line, which can quickly lead to escalation. The 21st century has been the democratization of ownership of nuclear weapons. No longer is it a case where the so-called big powers hold sway over the potentially world-ending devices. Countries like North Korea and Pakistan now possess a considerable number of missiles with nuclear capabilities, while reactive powers like Iran look to hone their skills in building them. For Mr. Lindley French, this poses the greatest risk that localized and regional nuclear warfare could well make swaths of the world uninhabitable. You could certainly see a situation in which a pair of regional powers go to war, Iran and Israel, India and Pakistan, and exchange nuclear weapons, he said. Mr. Lindley French did not rule out the chances of a global catastrophe, of course, acknowledging that these wars could suck in bigger powers, and the biggest strike in all of this is still a major salvo exchange between these great powers, he said. He said that would probably lead to at least a hemispheric extinction because of nuclear winter that may last for as long as 5 years, would kill crops and everything else. It would truly be a global war, a third world war, and would almost certainly lead to the extinction of a major part of the global population. Then we have the supervolcano eruption, the supervolcanic eruptions. There are volcanoes, we know there are about at least 21 supervolcanoes around the world. Now, great halts of structures that erupt at least 1,000 times more material than ordinary large volcanoes. After eruptions, supervolcanoes form big depressions in the ground called calderas, which hide vast lakes of magma that could, in theory, blow at any moment. There are about 20 supervolcanoes peppered across the planet, the most notable ones being Lake Toba in Indonesia, Lake Taupo in New Zealand, Campi Flegrei in Italy, and Yellowstone in the US. These are regions filled with those calderas, not just one but many points from which super eruptions could occur. So generally speaking, they erupt about once every 10,000 years, and there's no reason to believe they would not be a super eruption in the future, said Professor Christopher Kilburn, a volcanologist, University College London, UCL. The most recent supervolcano eruption occurred in Taupo of the North Island of New Zealand around 27,000 years ago and would have caused untold destruction. Some eruptions like that at Toba are said to have had far-reaching effects. causing severe global winters and squeezing the world's population size. But what would an eruption do to today's world? Well, the immediate vicinity of the supereruption would be completely devastated, said Professor Kilburn. A global effect, that's a different story. Clouds of the fine volcanic ash will rise into the stratosphere and will block sunlight for maybe several years. And more important is the release of volcanic gases like sulfur dioxide, which form opaque droplets of sulfuric acid and reduce the amount of sunlight and for much longer than the ash. This would cause a total disruption in the global food supply. Depending on where the eruption occurs, it will have major knock-on effects. If it happens at Yellowstone, that would have the possibility to overwhelm the global economy because the world's leading economy will be brought to its knees. Many economic repercussions would follow, which would then disrupt trade, food supplies, general activities around the world, and that in turn may lead to other destabilizing effects. These effects may not wipe out the entire human race, but they would have a significant impact on the number of people who survived. It would be an almost extinction level event. Crucially, he said, is how we might recover from any such eruption. It could set humans back hundreds of years. For now, there's no evidence that a super eruption will happen anytime soon, but Professor Kilburn warns that many volcanoes, including supervolcanoes, are not actively being monitored every day. It's a myth that the world is properly observing monitors. They measure particular points every few months, but even then they may not have the measurements relevant to understanding if there's going to be a build-up to a large-scale eruption. Climate change. In August 2022, an alarming analysis paper was published warning that the risk of global societal collapse or human extinction has been dangerously underexplored. Scientists today attribute many of the freak weather events to the slow-burning effects of climate change, an unprecedented heat wave in Europe, devastating wildfires in Hawaii, droughts in Africa. Dr. Luke Kemp at the University of Cambridge Centre for Study of Existential Risk, who led the analysis, said that while climate change does pose a significant threat to humans, what it contains is a series of risks that are far-reaching and possibly far more dangerous than rising temperatures in itself. It's all about knock-on effects and strings of disasters that lead into one another and end in what could be total destruction. He gives an example from 2010 in which a cascade effect can clearly be seen. Back then, an Arctic warming drive heat wave hit Russia and sharply decreased crop yields, he said. Russia responded by imposing a grain export ban, which in turn led to a spike in global grain prices. This hike in prices contributed to unrest and political change in Egypt and correlated with a surge in food bank usage in the UK of roughly 50%. The world is deeply connected, he said, with slight change somewhere as far away as Siberia making itself known in Africa or further afield. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about the risks, Dr. Kemp said. Militia groups fighting in Africa because things related to raising temperatures could lead to state failure, which in turn could potentially impact the cost of particular resource links in our country, which in turn has ripple effects throughout the whole global economy. It can manifest itself in many different ways. The civil war in Syria led to mass displacement of people desperate to flee conflict and persecution, which had a knock-on effect on European politics in the following years. Since the paper was released, the climate front at least have governments woken up to the potential risk climate change poses on humanity? I would say not, Dr. Kemp said. Currently, we still have most things based on mitigation and planning on integrated assessment models, which are not effective ways of exploring the worst-case scenario. While our paper gained a lot of attention and traction, as far as I can see, it's not led to governments doing that worst-case scenario planning. We can only hope that changes. This, of course, costs money. This is from Joel Day on Express UK. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.